Great. Well, we're now broadcasting live and our attendees will be joining with us. And welcome to everybody who are joining the webinar today. Bear with us for a minute or so while we allow people to connect and join with the call and get settled in, and then we'll be beginning. So welcome to everybody joining us. We're going to get going with the webinar in just a minute or so once we have people all join us on the call today and get settled in. So just bear with us for a little bit longer and then we'll get going. Okay, well, let's get going. We've got a number of attendees joining us, which is fantastic. So let's kick off this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on where you are in the world, our webinar today. So our webinar today is run by Gateway, and we will be discussing the importance of digitizing training and the alternatives to face-to-face in-person learning, and how we can really help continue the capacity building objectives during this particularly difficult and unprecedented time of coronavirus, but also all the learnings from beyond that that may well come from this, the challenges and the successes that we've been having during this time. Welcome to all of our panelists and our attendees. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. I'll introduce myself and give a few ground rules before handing over to all of our panelists to introduce themselves. So my name is Sarah Cooley. I have the pleasure of being the moderator today. And I work for both Gateway Academy and DFI, running and moderating webinars amongst other opportunities. Today we are going to be an hour on our call today. We'll be hearing from our panelists, but there will be time to answer your questions at the end of the session. So if you do have any questions for the panelists, please pop in the Q&A function, which will pop up at the menu bar on the bottom of the Zoom page. Do type them in there and then I'll ask them to the panelists at the end of the session. If it's a particular panelist you want to answer the question, just note who that is in your question. We do have the chat function. Please keep this for any informal hellos or chats that you might have, and we'll use the Q&A function for the questions and answering session. You'll also see that we're recording today's session and we'll be circulating the link to anybody perhaps who maybe falls off the call due to connectivity issues, although hopefully that won't happen. Or if you really enjoyed the session, you can then share that with your colleagues as well. That kind of is my, my welcome and my briefing for the session. So I'm going to now have the opportunity to introduce you to each and every single one of our panelists. We've got a number of years of experience. I won't say how many years exactly, because that might give away people's age. But we've got a number of years of experience on the line with us today. They're going to be sharing with you their thoughts, challenges, experiences in this field. To start off with, I'm going to go over to Twin, who's going to tell you a little bit more about herself and her background.
Well, thank you very much, and good day to everyone. My name is Chun Hui Ng, just call me Chun. And I'm a program director with Toronto Centre. And it's really my pleasure to be here with you today. I think that the topic is really very timely and appropriately on an online platform too. So just a short introduction to Toronto Centre. We are a non-profit based in Canada. Our focus is to build capacity in financial supervisors in developing countries. So our goal is to equip financial supervisors with both technical and leadership skills to supervise financial institutions such as banks, stock exchanges, securities companies, insurance, microfinance, etc., etc. And the idea is to equip them to skills to make sure that these institutions are safe and sound, and that depositors, consumers, and investors are all protected. So Toronto Centre was founded in 1998. We run about 70 week-long programs a year. And we actually deliver most of our programs in country before COVID. So I think this is really a very important transition for us here. My background, I am based in Singapore actually, and that's where I'm speaking to you from. Toronto Centre has quite a global footprint. My background is as a banking supervisor in Singapore for about 25 years. I work intensively with partners in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And actually, this week and last week, I was running a program in Botswana, which ended about an hour ago. So I'm really looking forward to learning from my fellow panelists and from all of you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's amazing to have you on the call with us. Thank you for your time today, and I'm going to hand over to David.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, my name is David Fair. I work for a company called Edulution. We work in Sub-Saharan Africa, delivering numeracy and literacy programs via a combination of tablet technology, smart analytics, and artificial intelligence, which creates custom learning pathways for each of our students. And it's delivered and facilitated by a collective of youth coaches that we train extensively to curate powerful learning environments for our students. We work offline and off grid, so we can work productively in the most sort of challenging and deprived areas of primarily Zambia, Namibia, and South Africa. We were sort of heavily disrupted by the challenges of COVID, and were unable to interact directly with our coaches. So we had to innovate pretty rapidly to develop learning solutions to reach them and continue our sort of skills work with those coaches. So we've had to innovate against our will, but now that we have, we're very grateful for the learnings and the growth in productivity and confidence that we've gained through this. So I'd be happy to share some more of those details with you. My perspective comes from the field of psychology. I was a practicing psychologist, and I'm very interested in how learners' mindsets affect their ability to respond positively to e-learning opportunities. And how you can leverage that. So I'm pleased to be here today.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And we look forward to hearing your learnings as the call goes on, David. Thank you. And over to Emmanuel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Emmanuel Umukoro, and I'm a research fellow at Lagos Business School, and also in-country facilitator at Digital Finance Frontiers Institute, where I lead the alumni graduates of digital financial service programs that have been held at DFI over the years. So it's my pleasure having been on this panel. Briefly about what I do at the business school, as a research fellow, what I actually drive is evidence-based research that translates into actions that are implementable and also facilitates digital inclusiveness in terms of financial services or financial inclusion. And also, I do some teaching at the business school also, where I help develop and implement curriculum pieces in the area of strategy, DFS, and also capacity building programs that has to do with regulators actually towards the regulatory enablement for the entire ecosystem. So at the Lagos Business School, as the case is, we actually try to build capacity for African business leaders so they can actually confront competitive issues that impact their businesses in a positive way. So that's what I do, and it's my pleasure again to be here amongst you all. Welcome, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. You're incredibly passionate about online learning, so we look forward to hearing your thoughts and experiences on the call today. And now handing over to Paul.
Thanks, Sarah. Lovely to be here on such an experienced panel. I selected my background today because I think it represents our transition from hard copy books and libraries in universities and colleges to doing stuff online. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Digital Frontiers, and Digital Frontiers houses both DFI, the Institute, and Gateway, our learning services business that's presenting today's webinar. Gateway's function and mission as a NPO is to help other organizations in the development sector with their transition from face-to-face capacity building to utilizing the affordances of digital technology to deliver capacity building and deliver online learning going forward. So lovely to be here.
Thank you very much, Paul, and we look forward to hearing your learnings on the call as well. And last but by no means least, Tom.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to my fellow panelists. It's great to be here with you all. I'm Tom Sinclair, and I'm currently the Chief Digital Learning Officer at Gateway. And you've heard us mention Gateway and Digital Frontiers, Digital Frontiers Institute. So Gateway is a merger of what was Gateway Academy and parts of what was Digital Frontiers. And we are a part of Digital Frontiers, and we have a long history of doing digital learning for the last 5 years. We were incubated inside of CGAP at the World Bank and merged just in July of this year. We've specifically been working on digital capacity building in Sub-Saharan Africa as Gateway Academy before we became Gateway. And so we have a long understanding and experience of what it takes to get organizations online, kind of thinking about what David said in terms of innovating against your will and helping organizations think about how to integrate online learning, digital learning into their existing capacity building structure. So I'm very happy to be here. I've been working in this field or around this field, either in digital capacity building, adult learning, knowledge management for the last 20 years in emerging markets, and happy to see that there's a lot more interest now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. And we're really looking to hear more about the journey that, that you've been on recently and with Gateway and your experience on the call too. Unfortunately, I see we've lost David, but hopefully he'll reconnect shortly with us. But to kick off the session, we'd like to hear from you, our attendees. So we have a great poll to get going. So on the screen in front of you, you should see a poll appearing on your screen. And of course, my poll does not want to work today. Seriously not happy about this because we're meant to be talking about how easy the transition online is. And of course, we have a technical error that stops the poll working.
This is typical of the experience of live online learning. Is we lose the fluency of human connection in exchange for the convenience of linking from all over the world. So the technology has to catch up with our intentions.
So instead of launching a poll, I'm just going to ask you to put in the chat box instead. So who amongst everybody who's online on the call today, who is planning on either moving a course from being currently face-to-face training or wanting to build an online course? If you are, click yes in the chat box, and then we can gather some ideas of who's interested in that particularly and what your plans are. So the chat box should be open to everybody at the bottom of the screen. So while we allow you all to type yes or no or your thoughts into the chat box, I think it's great that we'll hear from Paul, who's going to share a little bit of the experiences that Gateway and Digital Frontiers have had during this process and coronavirus and moving everything online and our experiences of doing so. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So it's very hard to summarize between our experience, many years of experience, things into kind of 4 minutes. So I've just selected 4 things to feed back on that I think are quite interesting. The first one is our findings on students. Students are both willing and able to transition from face-to-face to online. Often there's concern about will they enjoy it, will they like it, will they be able to have the right devices, the right connectivity. We found that those have, while they are barriers, and they're barriers that we need to specifically address, the willingness of the students to participate makes them able, that they find solutions to these problems themselves, and that barrier over time disappears. So we've been really pleasantly surprised by how willing and able students are. The second factor is around the academics or the facilitators or the subject matter experts who have been doing training or teaching or learning in a face-to-face environment. They are often less willing and less able to cope with the transition. If you've been doing something for 10, 15, 20 years in a particular way, moving to doing it differently is difficult, and they struggle more with it than the students themselves. Part of that difficulty, in our experience, has been the desire to simply emulate what was happening in a classroom online. And the problem with that is that they are different mediums, and that it doesn't translate exactly, and that you miss out on the real affordances of digital if you just try and emulate what was happening in the classroom. I like to think of it as the same as my early career was helping transition magazines and journals that were in hard copy to online. And all the rage was turning page web technology. You might remember it, where you would scan your magazine or your brochure or your journal, and then the person online could see the pages flicking. And a lot of traditional publishers thought this was the answer because it emulated what they had been doing for 20 years. What they didn't realize is that it would be short-lived because it wasn't taking advantage of the real affordances of the digital media. When things like Facebook and Wikipedia and Twitter come along, and YouTube, they just blow up the model, and they really use the technology. And I think that's what we need to get to for these academics and subject matter experts. And then the last 2 points is really learning and learning particularly around capacity building is done in a context of other people. And for our students, it is really important to feel that they are part of something, that there are other people on this journey with them, that they're not the only person that's going to be stuck on an assignment or battling to understand that there are other people, other colleagues that they're working with. That's a big learning. And then finally, that content is important, and the structure of content is important, and taking time and care about how you present it, how you reduce it, how you layer it is key if you want students to consume that content. If you just use your learning management system or your way of presenting content online as a repository, similar to the library behind me, you will not have the experience of students consuming that content.
Great, thank you very much, Paul, for sharing your experiences. And it's really good to know that at least 2 of our attendees, Sam, Kate and Keith, are working on moving courses to an online medium. So Sam, Kate and Keith, we hope that a lot of this information is going to be really helpful and relevant for you. And obviously to anyone, but in particular to those who are making that move already. So to build on what Paul shared with us, Trinh, does Paul's thoughts resonate with you, and what have you been experiencing? I mean, obviously you're having to go through a big change process, moving from face-to-face to online. How is that going? Any learnings, any successes, challenges? Please share with us.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Paul. Those are really 4 very insightful points, and all of them resonated with me. I'd just like to perhaps start on the point of the willingness of students. In our case, the willingness of public officials, financial supervisors. I would absolutely second that. And I would say COVID has really brought to the forefront many challenges to financial stability that financial supervisors need urgent assistance and guidance on. I mean, it's really critical to maintain public confidence in financial stability and in financial institutions. So I think we see a lot of increased demand actually for the guidance that we offer. And it's a matter of Toronto Centre having to meet the supervisors where they are. So our modality has been to conduct in-country 1 week long programs. In April, nobody had flights or time for that, and but they were all looking for immediate short-term guidance. So just to illustrate, on the 11th of March, WHO declared COVID a pandemic. And 8 days later, we brought a webinar, which was basically open to everybody, financial supervisors, where we brought a financial supervisor and a WHO health expert just to lay the ground, right? To lay out the implications of what does this health crisis mean for financial stability? What are the main things that financial supervisors should be looking for? So, so we have continued with a series of webinars. We also find that financial supervisors really need quite urgent assistance, tailored assistance. So we had requests saying that, you know, can you talk to us one-on-one for, let's say, half a day? We have like a business continuity planning issue that we really need to get addressed. And we would bring our experts in and do very short notice kind of engagements, also online. So certainly, yes, in terms of eagerness and demand, there's a lot. Paul is absolutely right. It does take a lot of training for our experts and program leaders. Most of them are, because of their years of experience, they tend to be of an older demographic, to be frank. And so we had to run kind of Zoom orientations and you know, things like that. And I myself, the whole staff of Toronto Centre went to attend a course online at a university in Canada, just to get our heads around like what's the best way to tailor the contents, you know, how to use breakout rooms, how to have flipped learning, all that kind of pedagogy is something that we are experimenting with. We do need to go for training. I'd just like to maybe end with the point of Paul, what you said about relationships. I think that's critical in person and online delivery. Is there something about creating a community of financial supervisors where a financial supervisor in Ecuador realizes that he or she is facing the same challenge as a financial supervisor in Indonesia and another one in you know, Botswana, for instance. And that sense of community is something that we try to recreate. We might have to explore different platforms. Like we experimented with setting up WhatsApp groups of the participants so that they can keep in touch with each other after the program has ended. We might run icebreakers prior to the program. So just to get a little bit of that informal interaction and that human touch, even though it's all done on a screen 2-dimensionally online.
Great. Thank you, Xuan, for sharing those experiences. And it's good to hear that you're moving through those challenges and coming up with different ways and moving the learning forwards, which is fantastic. David, you were mentioning that you've gone through a similar change period and learning new things. So perhaps you can share with us a little bit more about your learnings and if those same things that Xuan and Paul have mentioned resonate with you.
Yeah, very much. I was very interested to hear what Xuan was saying around replicating the useful aspects of live training in a smart online way, and that's exactly what we've been forced to do. We have we work with around 160 staff members that are scattered across 1,800 kilometers from into quite sort of deep rural areas, and so we had to continue reaching them with our training. And it's quite interesting to consider what you lose when you move away from live training. There's a lot of what I call secondary gain in a live training environment. It's not effective as a learning environment, but it's incredibly powerful as a way of building culture, relationships. It's experienced as a reward and something aspirational to attend. So with the move to online, which we did because of connectivity issues, we created a full e-learning course, which we hosted on our own LMS platform. It wasn't possible to have live Zoom calls because of the constant break in connection. It made for a very unproductive time. So we assigned all of our team members various courses which they needed to complete. We linked incentives to that. we found that learning total isolation on their own was very difficult for them. So once again, using WhatsApp groups, and we formed our team into learning pods. We had rotational leadership for those, with some instructions to create a structure around that learning experience, and that proved incredibly popular. So people might have been learning and completing the course on their own, but they would pause and check in with the group and field questions. They would have sort of energizers with one another, and they would recreate community in a way which preserved that sense of identity that they would always get from the live training. We found initially that we wanted to totally liberate everyone so they could log into the course and complete it when it suited them. We thought this would create the condition of freedom. We quite quickly learned that what people need in this disrupted space was some form of structure. So we actually provided expectations around when they needed to log in and commence learning. And the feedback was that that structure provided the freedom that enabled people to learn more effectively. So we found that was really, really, really interesting. With the design of our technology, we needed to quite quickly realize that although in Zambia particularly, it's very cheap to buy sort of credit. 1 gig of data is highly affordable. It's around 20 Rand, which is about $1 or so. But the connectivity is very poor. So it almost makes that free bandwidth, virtually free bandwidth, redundant. And similarly, although everyone has a smartphone, the screens are all cracked. So having beautifully designed graphics, largely pointless. Far more useful to have large print text, and also to film characters that they can relate to once again promote that feeling of continuity. So we used our trainers to record the videos, and the voiceovers were in their voices, and all of that preserved that feeling of continuity to them. So like as a last point I would make is that it's critical to remember that particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, I think learning is more of a social experience, and to get strong uptake, you need to replicate that in smart ways. And then to see your e-learning as part of a blended solution that precedes in-person training, so that the material is preceded, people have a chance to reflect on it, they come to training with questions that then make the actual live training far more useful, and therefore more affordable and scalable. Yeah, but it's a journey that we're on as well, and I think a willingness to learn, a willingness to step out of fear and to realize that that's far more important to innovate than to get everything right is quite a healthy attitude.
Absolutely, that we're not trial and error. Let's learn from the mistakes and let's learn from the things that are working is super important attitude to have. And I also saw Emmanuel nodding away through a lot of what you were saying, David, because I think there's a lot of overlap and similarities. Because Emmanuel, I'm going to come to you next to get your view. So both as a student, but also as one of DFI's community of practice facilitators, where it's your role to get people together as part of the learning of their online course. Tell us your experience, both as a student, but also of the COP facilitator, of the what's happened during coronavirus and moving towards having those meetings online. Over to you, Emmanuel.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I think I'll begin with my experience as a student. Sometime 2017, I started my journey to becoming certified digital finance practitioner with DFI foundational courses. And along the line, there have been challenges, but really for me, I think it has been a mixed experience in the sense that there are wins and there are losses. But my wins really are actually justified by the things that I have set out to achieve personally. Number one is that I wanted to complete, all my capacity building programs, that I set out when I began, without recourse to any negative impact, on the work I do, because I know that I owe my employer an obligation as well. At the same time, I didn't also want my work, my job at the business school, to stop me from building the capacity, that is required, for an ever advancing, and dynamic business environment in that sense. So I have to embrace the online, learning. And that means that there are giveaways as well. So I needed to sacrifice comfort and all of that. But what is really remarkable about it is the fact that I think from DFI perspective, and I do not just speak of only DFI, and I know there are some others too, and who have told this line. The course design really, it is something that perhaps there had been a learning needs assessment, to really kind of understand what are the learning needs, the peculiarities of our students or the prospective people that we want to serve in this market. I read Paul's article, when Paul talked about the video conferencing tools were not really built in as educational tools in the first instance. It was just to connect people. But, given the case, the current reality, I do know that a lot of platforms have come up and have redesigned their platform, to really deliver education in that level. So for me, it was a balance because the tools really help you to schedule. Some of them are courses that, both synchronous and asynchronous, So he also talked about course design, while he was also presenting. So having all these things put together really gave me the opportunity to see, okay, there is so much flexibility that I can really explore. Number one, the courses have been designed in such a way that though there is a specific time period, maybe 3 months, 12 weeks or 9 weeks to complete the courses, there is also that ability for you to schedule your time. Okay, I am going to do all my asynchronous, learning within this time of the day, of the week. Then the synchronous, the live sessions, I'm going to, so you just work your way around it. So that is what, this transition, because I have done my first degree and second degree, and also doing a PhD that required me to interface all the time. And that's really been difficult because I have to travel distances. Now, let me carry that and also try and put it side by side, my experience as a DFI in-country facilitator. When we started, Sarah, you remember, we have up to, let's say, 40 students who have registered to take DFI courses. And the nature is that within a cohort, we are supposed to meet 4 times, within that cohort. But because of geographical, dispersion, how people are separated, and sometimes you have traffic, congestion. People have difficulty commuting and converging at a physical location. Our attendance, perhaps maybe 50, 60, the greatest as the case may be, the highest we record. But we tried exploring, but we needed to network. We needed all DFI, students to know what each was doing so that they can, come together and compete, favorably to serve the market better, share knowledge, share experiences. But the distance and all the elements, that were constraining couldn't help us to achieve that. Then came COVID. We had no option than to move to online. And Sarah will agree that I've always been an advocate of that. Then here in Nigeria, you have people in Lagos, people in Abuja, you have people in Port Harcourt, that will take, even if you were to fly, it will take you 45 minutes at least to get to Lagos or get to Abuja from some of these locations. So the online, platform allowed us to now come together. I remember one event we had, the event that typically we have 23 people in attendance. We have over 80 something, that were live in that session. They interacted, with industry experts, bank CEOs, Ignacio Mas, connected all the way from Barcelona. And so that gave us the opportunity to network. Some of our members in the alumni network that had not been part of this discussion before, they were able to come together. And within this 5 months, 6 months that there has been lockdown and we couldn't even meet physically, we are beginning to see interest, people who are genuinely interested, in being part of the conversation, advocacy, contributing from experience, what, they have done over the years in their various organizations, just to drive financial inclusion, digital financial services, and more voices, putting their upset. Of course, I know there are challenges, but for me, really, online has been a bridge between those gaps that are location, time schedule, are committed, having to, you can't really travel because you have another meeting scheduled, so online broke all those barriers and we have seen tremendous progress. An association, that alumni network that we wanted to formalize since 2017, that we struggled with. When we began this year, we are already at the final stage of registering with Nigeria's Corporate Affairs Commission that regulates, any business registration and all of that. So there is really this synergy, there is this understanding that we have come to, and again, we've come to embrace. Quickly, really for me, I think there are other things I will talk about, maybe the challenges and the benefits, but this has been my experience. If you ask me, I think it has to be a blended approach. I have maybe 50 or 60% online and maybe 40% physical meeting. And for those who want to go online all week, there's no problem with that. It really saves cost, for some people, because when you look at the time lost commuting, I think Nigeria is one of the highest, one of the countries that you spend man hours on the road, so the time that we use for productivity, trying to commute places and all of that. So these are my thoughts in terms of experience with online, capacity building and all of that.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And I think in a conversation I was having earlier today with Paul, I think Paul put it quite nicely that connectivity is less of an issue than traffic and transport. That actually we assume that people are going to have issues connecting to online learning and online calls, but really basic things such as traffic jams, transport actually are potentially more of a barrier to people than connectivity. In certain areas. Obviously, David, your experience is in more rural areas where connectivity for sure is a challenge. But it's about trying to pull out the positives and really emphasize what is working and what can work really well digitally. And that helps you overcome some of the, yes, it does have some challenges and some weaker areas. Interestingly, one of the things that a lot of people also, as well as connectivity, see as a challenge is this concept of relationships. But the three of you spoke about actually how online you've managed to create those relationships, whether it's a fun icebreaker learning session that you were referring to, Twen, or like a WhatsApp group, or to connecting people in teams so that they do that learning together through the program that you talked about, David. And Emmanuel, obviously your sessions bring people together online to contextualize what they've learned to their own country, which gives you that relationship networking building. So I guess we can, building relationships absolutely is possible online. We just need to do it slightly differently. And I'm just going to ask Paul or Tom if there's anything that they want to chip in here about the idea of building relationships online.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely key. And I think building on some things that I heard from everyone in thinking about your audience and how to do that is key. So there's not just one approach to building relationships online. And so if we think about David's example, for example, with geographically dispersed audience with low connectivity who don't need the super high graphics, that's one audience. And Twen, who's dealing with regulators and policymakers, and probably with a lot higher expectations in terms of what they're going to see, is another, and how they're going to interact with each other. I'm glad to hear, Twen, that the WhatsApp group worked really well. I'm glad you experimented with that. And that's probably some sort of one technology that you could use across different audiences. But understanding how audiences connect, what their comfort level with technology is, what their connectivity is in terms of device and access to internet, and those various factors that you would pull in sort of designing any kind of learning, as Paul talked about the importance of layering, the importance of timing. I think all of that's relevant also in building communities online. There's also, I would point people to a lot of work that was previously done in the field of knowledge management. And Sarah, you're probably familiar with a lot of this around communities of practice. I mean, this field has a rich history. There's a lot written on it where these sectors haven't really come together too much, this online capacity building and then and how you build community online. so there's a lot out there, I think, that we could learn from.
So, Sarah, I mean, I find it really interesting that it's come out of everyone. But I think that we might be surprised that our perception that it's harder or that community doesn't get built online is actually just a perception and not the reality. And I'm going to use two different examples, which are very anecdotal and personal, but I think they make sense. When I met my wife, there wasn't the internet. I didn't have access to a computer, and I didn't have access to email. I was at a university that was 1,000 miles away. And we wrote to each other. And we built a relationship that way. We didn't have to physically be in the same place. And I've happily married for 20 years. So like that idea of only building relationships when you're in the physical space together, I'm not sure that there are plenty of other examples that works. And the second one is that I'm a massive sports fan, but I have children that love computer games. And my personal perception is playing sport teaches you how to have relationships. You're physically with people, you negotiate stuff, you win, you lose together. You know what, sat behind your computer, no, you're isolated. But when I dig into the research, actually, young people that play computer games, where they're engaging with other people, they develop the skills of relationship building sometimes better than children that are meeting face to face. So I think there are the affordances there. There is the ability to build relationships. We just got to realize that it happens differently.
Thanks, Paul, for sharing those examples. And yeah, it's a learning curve for us all that we're going through. But it's really exciting to hear that, you know, there are different ways of doing it, and there are lots of different options. I mean, there's so much technology out there. It's about picking the right thing that might work for whoever it is, whoever our audience are. And I guess also just checking in with our audience. I mean, if we know who our audience are, we've done that research well, we'll be able to tailor the most appropriate kind of intervention that meets their needs. So it's a good reminder that we not to make sure that we're very connected and understand what our audience wants. So moving on to another question now, can digital be as effective as a capacity building tool as face-to-face? You know, can it be as effective? Trent, I'm going to come over to you to get your thoughts on that one.
I think in short, I would say yes, but the delivery has to be really thought through carefully. I think we are all quite aware of the disadvantages well, there are connectivity issues, there's Zoom fatigue, and things like that. So I think it behoves us to really think a lot more from the participants' point of view of what would work for them in terms of the scheduling and in terms of, let's say, perhaps more emphasis on assigning pre-readings, which then they can do on their own at their own time. And Emmanuel has, rightly, I think, pointed out many advantages of online learning, of being able to do it at your own time and then coming together in a Zoom setting for some further guidance. Is kind of like the flipped learning model. I would also say that actually, I find sometimes that doing things online makes it easier to deliver things in bite-sized chunks. So just for example, we do long-term engagement programs where we work with partners for like 2 to 3 years. And we go for on-site visits, let's say 3-week-long on-site visits on risk-based supervision. And it used to be because of the constraints of cost and travel, we go there and it's like a bazooka, we deliver everything the whole day for a week. We have to get through this. And sometimes our partners need, not because of indigestion or anything, but they just need to go back to the banks, for instance. So let's say if we are working on a project where our partner is collecting data from banks, it's sometimes useful to actually do it in smaller size, consistent chunks. So instead of having 3 bazooka visits on site, I found that during these months, it was more effective to, let's say, have, 2 days of meetings every 2 weeks. So that allows the partners to get back to the banks to clarify the data, come back with the issues that they face, and then we address it step by step. So that was not an outcome that I expected, but it's something that I think really worked well in terms of the pacing and allowing time for the partners to work within their financial systems, especially in this really unpredictable time where you're not sure what challenges might arise in terms of information and communications. So I would say, yes, digital can be as effective, and in some cases, it can actually work to the advantage of all parties.
Great, and thank you for showing that advantage of the pacing and giving people time to absorb. I think that's a really key point and a great learning that's come out of moving online. Thank you for that. I'm going to move over to David to see what his thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks, Trinh. That was absolutely fascinating. 2 brief points that I would make. The one relating to our work at Edulution is that our training falls into 2 streams. The one is technical skills, which relates to operating our technology, etc. And the other would fall under the soft skills category. I would say, in the case of technical skills, online training is superior. It allows the learner to focus. It allows them to engage one-on-one instead of one-to-many. So it's highly efficient. We can put in place checks and balances. There's a sort of a test to audit the learning, to then stream them to repeat something, or to move on if they've already mastered a concept. So it becomes highly efficient and personalized, and we can measure whether they have learned the skill or not. In the case of soft skills, which are critical to our business, our staff need to be very skillful with managing community leaders, education authorities, as well as learners in large groups, and that takes a particular type of skill set, and we constantly create training and pass it on. That is harder to do online because most soft skills, I believe, are learned through relationships. They're mediated through other people who model and provide feedback. It's a lot harder to do that online. I think when I sort of research that, I find people still exploring and not quite finding the answer yet to how to successfully teach soft skills. So I think the jury's out on that, and we find there's still a gap that is far better filled through in-person encounters, and particularly group training, where groups can provide a certain amount of feedback to someone that can be quite powerful to them. And the second point I'd make is something very surprising we found, is when we conduct synchronous training via Zoom, when it does work, we find it's very liberating for the introverted members of our group. They are disinhibited from contributing in a way they never would be if there was a large group. And I think to myself, if I was attending a conference, there's no chance, 99% of the people in the audience will never put up their hand, despite the fact they have contributions or burning questions. But on Zoom, it's quite easy to do that. And so I think you unlock quite valuable material and contributions from people that is to the benefit of the collective. Yeah.
Thanks, David. So I'm hearing that, yes, there are some areas where perhaps it is not as effective, but there are certainly many areas where it actually excels and provides better opportunities than face-to-face. Maybe panelists, one of you maybe have any other comments to add to this question?
Yeah, I would love to say I love this idea. My first reaction to your question, Sarah, was is it as effective as effective at what, right? And I think that's one question we have to ask, because is online learning as effective as in-person learning at getting information across, at teaching skills? Because I think David had mentioned the secondary gain of in person, and I think that's key. And I think some of that can be replicated, but not really. And but I love what Trinh was saying about the bite-sized learning, and we've tried to do some of those types of things in person, where maybe you run you do some learning in the morning, and then you send people out to do some experiential something in the afternoon. But if you're in country for a week and your travel budget is only, you have so much budget, you have to, I totally understand that pressure to get that information across while you're in country. So I actually think, I'm hopefully optimistic that as we emerge from the pandemic we have now, that we really take a good look at the advantages and disadvantages of online and in-person to figure out that blended, the optimal blended effect, as Emmanuel was saying, that the blended is really the key, but how do we use them correctly, and what's the balance there?
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, my view is that it already has proved significantly more impactful. And I'll give two examples of that. One is just the sheer scale. Take, for example, Coursera's open course on Python development. The number of people that have done that and are now capable as a result of it could never be achieved in a face-to-face environment. You would have trainers, you just couldn't do it. So that's one example. And the second is, if you just think about how many people have skilled themselves up and been able to achieve something by looking at YouTube videos. Massive scale. So I think on the measures of scale, on the measures of pure, can the person do a technical thing? Can they become competent in? Absolutely. I think the blended approach, it is important then to be very, very deliberate in your face-to-face engagements to decide what it is that engagement is about. And if it is about soft skills, don't confuse it with being about knowledge transfer or the hard technical skill. Focus that time on the soft skill.
And if I could just briefly add. Sarah, let me make this briefly. I think for low-income preparedness, I give you here in Nigeria, and we have the public ones run by the government. But because public universities were not prepared, for any digital transition, as we speak right now, they are still at home. But for the private ones, they've completed semesters, done their exams, and they are looking forward to a new session. So the digital preparedness is something that our governments really have to put in perspective. Of course, there are issues with broadband penetration and all of that, but it doesn't take away the massive benefit that online, really brings to the equation. And if you ask me, I'm an advocate for that. We have done courses in this pandemic with financial service regulators, people we couldn't have brought, together before, but they've all been in the same, room. We take them to their different breakout rooms. I have done courses on product development, prototyping, for FSPs that everyone is onboarded into a product development lab, and they are doing their things. We are validating their assumptions. They are going to doing online telephone interviews. So the potential is massive. But I just think that for those whose income levels are still low, I think there really has to be some level of advocacy, that we need to do to make sure that we complement government, in these areas. Regulators that wouldn't have want to do online, the pandemic forced them, and they were all happy, they came for the programs. We did want to for financial service provider, in business models of financial inclusion, and we had over 100 FSPs, participate in that program, and they were looking forward to implement the things that, they have learned. So I really share all these perspectives, and I hope that our government, especially sub-Saharan Africa and beyond, they begin to start thinking of even making the environment enabling, for these things to thrive. Yeah.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is, one of my questions I was going to ask is, once we get back to whatever normal is after the pandemic, whether we're all going to rush back to, sitting in a chair in a classroom, but it sounds as though there's been so many advantages and so many positives of online learning, and that they're actually forcing us to move to online, has been very beneficial for many people. So I'm assuming that we're going to be now looking at leveraging on that transition that's happened. And yes, there may be some instances where we do revert back to face-to-face, but actually it will be very much tailored to the situation, to what needs to be, learned, what the expectations and, who our participants are, that we'll be taking a much more considered approach. Is online the best way, or, is face-to-face the best way? If anyone thinks differently, do unmute yourself and let me know. Otherwise, I will skip that question.
I think, Sarah, just to put it in context, after this pandemic, or when it's finally over, there are lots of persons that are even reluctant to come back to face-to-face. They want to continue online. And we're going to see an improvement in that trend. Look at the typical university case I gave you. After this lockdown, after this pandemic is over, government is going to have to invest in preparing public schools, for digital solutions, for digital learning, because it's not going to be effective, staying face-to-face. A state government here in Nigeria is planning to promote every student to the next class without having to write exam, because they weren't prepared for any kind of intervention that would have been easily done online, and they don't want to lose the year. Students are paid school fees, right? And what do you tell them? They don't even have the budget, to come and do a temp over. And so these are some of the things that governments are going to start looking into. It might be expensive to start with, but they are going to embrace it, because we don't know if this pandemic is going to come again. We don't know if something bigger is going to come. So when it does come, how do we scale? How do we leapfrog? And this is really what is going to drive, some stakeholders, to make sure that they are digitally ready. And I think Nigeria has even started that in terms of, driving 5G and all of that. These are the conversations that we never had before, the pandemic. In the midst of the pandemic, they were testing 5G, to see that, look, how can we begin to implement? So there is potential. And I think a lot are going to move online.
So digitization is here to stay. David?
Yeah. I mean, that's my very brief comment on this was that prior to this, we knew that e-learning was important, but it was never urgent. And thanks to COVID, it's still important, but it's now become urgent. And that meant that we finally executed on those plans. And much to our surprise, they've worked and been successful. So I think that's clearly the silver lining to what has been a very dark cloud. And I think that is a healthy way to positively sort of reframe your response to this. This is clearly, there are such riches available in this approach, and this simply compels you to embrace it. And your question is how best to do it. And and I think there's a lot of people to learn from in this space, and lots of technology, open source stuff, and free and open license material, which is incredibly helpful in de-risking your first foray into an e-learning approach, which is quite wonderful. So, yeah.
Twin?
Yes, just briefly, I see a parallel between this online learning and this global work from home experiment. Before COVID, nobody thought that this was possible, and yet reality has proven them wrong. So eventually, when we can go back to the office, some will find that work from home still works for them. Some may find that going back to the office works for them, and I think it's the same with online. Now that we know that it can work, I don't think there's any turning back. It's a matter of finding the right mix, as it were.
Thanks, Twin. And I agree. I think, it's not about turning back. It's about finding the best way forward for everyone. I'm just going to encourage our attendees, if you've got any questions for the panelists, please do pop it in the Q&A function, and we'll get round to it in our last couple of minutes that we've got live. But I'd also like to specifically ask both Paul and Tom, if people on the call are looking to get some help with moving their content online, what steps do they need to take? What kind of support, etc., should they seek? Can you just give us some key highlights on that, please?
Sure, I can start. I just picking up a little bit on what David was saying with what's available out there. That there is a lot that you can begin to pilot with and experiment with, and you don't have to move everything all at once. You can begin to try to see, especially what works for the learners or the students that you're working with, right? And going back to the layering and the timing to understand how your learners work and how they can best engage. Certainly at Gateway, we work with lots of organizations to help them think through this, help them look at what their current offering is and how going online might work with that, and how they might start small also in this pilot and experimentation phase. And we also, and there are others out there have, and we are kind of agnostic as to how people do this because there's so much out there, but we also have a platform where people want, if they want to start experimenting and piloting, we can do that. Yeah, I would think that's key. And then figuring out as you do this, where you need to get support. And so where you need to partner. And if that is pulling in an online learning expert, or maybe a subject matter expert in whatever it is you're doing, figuring out where those opportunities are to pull in support.
Yeah, I think that's great advice from Tom. I would just point to two things to consider. Is you need to start right back at the beginning and look at the outcome. The temptation is to start with what you have. Put what you have aside and consider why you have what you have. What were you trying to achieve with that? So go really back to the outcome, not starting with the content to what you have. So that's the first point. And the second point is you need to make sure on that team or the advice you seek is from people that sit on the other side of the fence. And by that, I mean people that come from a digital background, not from a face-to-face training background, because they understand the affordances, they understand what can work, they look at the problem differently. The temptation is to start with, I have this content, I have this facilitator, let them do the migration. I think you need to bring in outside influences to that discussion.
So this, I love the expression that Twin used. This experiment that we've been going through over the last few months has brought a lot of there's a lot of experts in the field. There's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of places that you can support. So you don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel every single time, and reach out and find that support. I'd just like to, we're a little bit over time, but I just want to go around each of you just to get your a closing remark before we end the session. So we began with Twin, so let's start the closing with you. What are your final remark for the session?
Well, I would say that at Toronto Centre, I think we feel that we are at the start of a journey, a very interesting one. To transition online, it was not a change that we had foreseen, but now that we have run quite a few programs online, I think we are learning as we go along. And we look forward to partnering organizations like DFI to learn from you on how you have implemented these things. And you know, this has been a great panel, and I think we've learned a lot and taken a lot from the panelists here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I definitely concur there. We've learned a lot today. David, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would probably close with advice I'd give myself, which is to preserve the human element in your e-learning training as much as possible, whether it's a human that checks in on the e-learner to keep them accountable and to keep them connected to the broader community, or to simulate in a real way that human element as much as possible. People learning in isolation, I don't believe gets quite the best out of them. So I would say to humanize your use of technology as much as possible is worthwhile. Yeah, it's
great reminder. Thank you, David. Emmanuel, your brief summary?
Yes, I think for me, the potential is huge. There is an untapped market for both providers and consumers. But really, there are issues that, and I remember when when we began the pandemic, we had issues with Zoom, you know, being data compromised and all of that. You know, so I think for providers, it's very important that they put in place those measures that ensure that there is data protection and data privacy of users, are really taken into consideration. For organizations that are really seeking to, do capacity building for their employees and all of that, it's very important also that there has to be this sensitization. The change management element really has to, to come to the limelight, because you don't just wake up and throw people into what they are not used to. With time, people get to used to the system, but organizations must begin to prepare. HRO needs, to start, train the trainers. 1 or 2 persons start for us, do a simulation in-house and all of that. Then for curriculum builders, like Dave said, you really need to preserve that human element, when it comes to, delivering the content of your curriculum. And I've seen that, play out at a business school where we try to bring a whole lot of tools together. We use murals, we use Google Sheets, put people in room, give them work to do. And you use Marvel, where people can start doing low fidelity prototype when you are building products. So people are in groups from their different locations, but they are working, on the same project. So you see everybody's hand, moving. No one is left out. So, and I think Zoom has done a great job in that area, even Microsoft Teams and all those other ones. Then again, the fact that people can, those who will not talk, you see them contributing via, their chat, their discussion threads, knowledge sharing is beginning to grow, and there is a lot that we can learn. So these are the 3 dimensions I really want to weave it in. Developers, of these platforms really need, to see that there is value created as much as they also want to capture value. Organizations have to do that change management. And for those who develop curriculum pieces, keep that human element in place and make sure that the tool also allows you to, to kind of get feedback from users. And it has to be a continuous process where you are improving based on user feedback. So I think governments, on the other end, yes, there has to be an enabling environment. It's very important. Digital technologies, broadband penetration, all of those things, they need to get up, because if they are absent, power is also there too. People are not going to, get the best out of online. And I really think these are some of the things that users see and they want to hold back online. No, I'm not doing. But as these things, fit together, people understand the need, to the importance of not wasting this time lost, all things begin to fall in place. I think I should stop here.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Yeah, and changing the mindsets of people, I think, was about embracing digital is a good point. Paul, over to you for your closing remarks.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to kind of the starting point, which was, if you look at the library behind me, that's where I started my career, was helping people transition from books to ebooks. That concept is gone now, from commerce to e-commerce. We just have commerce. I think we need to start thinking about learning, and that there are tools to facilitate learning, and digital is part of that, and it's going to become a central part of it. And if you start to think about it that way, the solutions that we come up with will be better. They won't just be transposing what we've done in a physical environment in a digital one.
Thank you, Paul. And lastly, Tom?
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I think that we often look at a binary choice of online learning and in-person learning. And I think Paul's right, we're going to get to learning, and we're going to not go back to where we were. And going forward, we're going to look at how best we can learn online and how best we can learn in person.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to say a big thank you to our attendees, and also especially to our panelists for joining the session today. I found it really interesting. It's clear that online is here to stay. It's clear that online has some distinct advantages, and the way forward, as you said, is to find the right approach for the right people at the right time. I look forward to hopefully working with you all again in the future, because it's been really enjoyable, and good luck with all of your transitions. And yes, we'll be having a second webinar in the series, and I look forward to seeing many of you again on that one. So have a wonderful day, evening, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah,
Thank you.
very much.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.